Hi and welcome to the second webinar in our series, How to Grow Your Retirement Savings. My name is Josh Van Gestel. I'm the Senior Manager of Education at Australian Retirement Trust, and I'm joined by one of my wonderful team, April Smith. How are you,
Hello,
April?
I'm good.
For everyone's awareness, this is one of the first times that April and I are actually doing a webinar together, so anything could happen on this journey.
Well, wish us luck.
Yes, absolutely. But there are three acknowledgements I would like to make, besides wishing us luck actually. There are three acknowledgements I would like to make. The first is I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are doing this broadcast from, the Turrbal and the Yuggera people. But I would like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands from which you are joining. At Australian Retirement Trust, we would like to acknowledge them and pay our respect to elders, past, present, as well as those emerging, as well as any First Nations people on this webinar with us. The second acknowledgement I'd like to make is to each of you, to take the time to actually think about your retirement and to invest in your own financial future. And it really is something that you should be very proud of taking control of and doing something about. And this is something we'll come to more in a moment. The third acknowledgement, though, I will hand over to April for.
Thank you, Josh. Before we do begin, we do need to let you know that the information we provide today is just going to be general advice or factual information. So we're not taking into account your personal circumstance. So if you want to ask us, what should I do? We can't answer that. But if you want to ask, what could I do? Then we'll be able to talk to you about those options. Now, we do also have our education team in the background helping us answer the questions that will come through today. So if you want to ask us a question, just click on Ask Us a Question and we will have our team locked and ready to go for you. And also there is a section there that has our Retirement Essentials workbook for you to download, and you can input all your details so you can work out a retirement plan for yourself. Now, talking of that Retirement Essential workbook, we have four sessions going in the series. So we call it our Retirement Essential series. We are currently doing the second part, which is growing your superannuation. If you wanted to know where to start, you might want to register for our Plan Your Retirement. So this is where you're working out what's that magic number for yourself. Our third part series is Paying Yourself in Retirement. So maybe you're coming to the edge of retirement and you want to know what your options are. Then there's also Thrive in Retirement. So when you're in retirement and you'd like to thrive. What we're going to be covering off today, though, is we're going to do a little bit of a recap on that Plan for Your Retirement session that was before this one. We're also going to go through contribution strategies, also what investment options that you do have, and also how to financially protect yourself and your loved ones. But who are we firstly? We are Australian Retirement Trust members, and what you may have is either a super savings account or a Q Super account, but you all form a part of Australian Retirement Trust. So just a little over 3 years ago, Sun Super and Q Super did merge to form one of the biggest funds in Australia. What that means for our members is when you are a larger fund, you've got a lot more opportunity, and particularly with investments, which Josh will go through shortly. So just a little bit about that previous session we held, how to plan your retirement. So what we talked about is where to go, what things to consider, how much you might need in retirement. Also working out what options you've got in paying yourself when you do get to retirement. But we do have a case study here that was from that prior session, and I'm going to get Josh to take you through that case study.
Thank you, April. You can have a tiny bit of a break. Thanks. While I jump in. Now, some of you who attended our first webinar would be familiar with this case study. For those of you who didn't attend that webinar or who haven't watched the video, let me bring you up to speed a little bit. What we had was a couple. I actually called them Rob and Joe, and we said that Rob and Joe are quite typical. that we've got one who is aged a little bit older than the other, so going to hit retirement first. They've got a combined income of $120,000 and total super savings at the moment of about $100,000. Now, what we talked about in webinar 1 was different lifestyles that you may want to actually think about aiming for. And one of those was what we called the comfortable lifestyle. Now, in order to achieve that, there were key figures that Joe and Rob needed to achieve in terms of income. So we played this out in our retirement forecaster, which you can access on our website. And that retirement forecaster asks you to put in a couple of details, and then what it will actually do is spit out a result. And that result will give you a projection as to where it thinks your super could be going in terms of its balance, and then what income that will deliver to you throughout your retirement. So in the case of Joe and Rob, what we saw was that they had this target income that they wanted of about $78,000 a year. Now, in the early years, the younger one of them would still be working. Remember, one was a couple of years older, so would probably retire just ahead of them. So we still have employment income coming into the mix. What we also have is from the older member of the couple having access to superannuation. Now we have overlaid in this also access to the age pension. Now, to just play some of this out, there are two problems with this scenario for Joe and Rob. The first problem is that that target income they wanted throughout their retirement is not going to be achieved year on year. In fact, in some years, it is going to fall short quite considerably. The second issue that we have through this forecast is that they are completely, from the age of about 77, completely dependent upon the age pension. Now, that might be okay, but you might remember that in the first session, we talked about needs and wants, and that the age pension is really good for helping you look after your needs, your day-to-day requirements, but it doesn't necessarily help you in those things that you want to do or want to enjoy or explore in retirement. Your superannuation gives you flexibility, it gives you choice, it gives you freedom. So we have to think about, well, for Joe and Rob in this scenario, how can we improve this? And it's not saying we get rid of the age pension. It's not saying we have them put a huge amount of money into super. It's about how do we have them shift a couple of levers that can really change this outcome. And this is something that is within the reach of many of us. So what we did in the case of Joe and Rob was we said, well, in spite of the fact we acknowledge there is real cost of living pressure at the moment, Joe and Rob realised that they need to actually direct some additional contributions into their super to grow it. And so they've decided to make that additional contribution of about $10,000 a year each. They've also looked at their investments and decided that they are going to invest a bit more aggressively. What that outcome, as by actually replaying this through the retirement forecaster, what that outcome means is they are two things. Effectively going to achieve their target income for the majority of their retirement and actually beyond life expectancy. But secondly, they are going to have superannuation as a part of their income mix for the majority of their retirement. As I said, this gives them flexibility, it gives them freedom, it gives them choice. And this is what we're trying to do through this program. Not necessarily saying to you that all your retirement has to come from super, or you're stuck with all of it coming from the age pension, but thinking about how these could work in tandem. Some of you might do that retirement forecaster and find out your super is going to be enough for you, and that's great. Some of you might find out that by putting a little bit more in or by making some changes, it could be a really effective way to supplement the age pension, which will be actually the outcome for the majority of us. So there's a couple of things that we really need to think about in this. And April and I are going to talk about how we actually go through a number of different goals and outcomes to achieve a better retirement or the retirement that you actually want. So the first thing, and again, we covered this off a little in session 1, was you can consolidate and make extra contributions to your super. If you've got superannuation in separate funds, unless you have a clear reason as to why, I'd suggest that you maybe want to bring those together. The advantage of that is that it can be saving you on multiple fees, and it can also be saving you on multiple insurances. The second thing that you can consider is the way you're investing. Could you actually think about investing a bit more aggressively where you're comfortable to do so to grow your super further? Now, when it comes to your retirement balance, the final figure you have is in part going to be made up of contributions, but the bulk of what makes up your super balance is actually what you've earned through investment earnings. So it's really important that you think about how you can make that work harder for you. And we'll talk a bit about that, but also talk about the importance of you being comfortable with that. The third thing that April is going to talk about is through all of this, although we're talking about building wealth and then in retirement drawing down on that wealth, it's important to make sure that during that process you are also protected if something happens to you. What if you do not make it to retirement? What if you have to retire early due to illness or ill health or injury, for example? These are all things that often we don't consider, but really in looking at wealth accumulation and growing our wealth, we also have to think about how we protect it. So a couple of things that I would really suggest that you do after this session. And for those of you that attended the first webinar, hopefully you've done these already. But firstly, lean in on your investment understanding and knowledge. Visit our website, get a better idea of the investments that we have, some of which I'll talk to throughout this webinar, but also learn about how you tick when it comes to investments. Are you comfortable with the fact that investments can be very volatile, or will that actually keep you awake at night? Do you need to change the way you're investing to achieve a stronger outcome, but you also want to limit the risk that you're taking in doing so? The investor profile quiz or the risk profile quiz is a really good way for you to just start getting a feel for what investments you may or may not be comfortable with making and how you can take a more powerful step with the way you invest your super. Before we talk about investments though, we can't talk about growing your money if there's no money to start with. So yes. April, do you want to talk to us a bit about different contribution strategies?
Contributions, yes. So there is lots of types of contributions that you can make into your superannuation. So we'll firstly touch on those contributions. One of those is called a before tax contribution. In superannuation world, you might hear this as a concessional contribution. All it means is that those contributions are coming into your account before any taxes are applied, and they get taxed within superannuation instead. Now, these contributions could be from your employer. It also could be via salary sacrifice or where you have claimed a tax deduction. And we will dive a little bit more into those before tax contributions. But you also have after tax contributions, and that's exactly what they are. Contributions that are paid after a marginal tax rate has been applied. So you can think about this like, for example, you've got money in your bank account and you want to move that over into your super account. You've already paid the taxes to be receiving in your bank account, so when it goes into super, no further taxes are applied. Now, this could also be from a spouse contribution, and I will touch base on spouse contributions shortly. There's also the government co-contribution that could go in your super. This is a strategy for lower income earners. And there's also the downsizer contribution. So this is where you sell your home and you're looking at putting in those proceeds into your superannuation. But if you're looking at putting money into your super, there is those considerations. It's going into super. So you need to make sure that you are aware that superannuation is preserved until you meet a cashing condition, which is generally age 60, permanently retired, ceased work. So let's go through all of those different options to access. Well, when you turn 60, if you are still working, what you could look to do is open what's called a transition to retirement account. And this is where you can access a maximum of 10% of your superannuation. So it's a part amount that you can draw down if you are still working. If you're between 60 and 64 and you are retired, you can have full access to your superannuation. If you cease employment after the age of 60, everything in your account up until that date also becomes unrestricted, meaning you're able to access those funds. And the good thing about being over 60 as well is they are all paid out tax-free. When you turn 65, regardless of your working arrangements, you will have full access to your superannuation. And we do have that Retirement Essentials program. One of them is called How to Pay Yourself in Retirement, where we really do a deep dive into your accessibility with your super. So why age matters when we talk about contributions? Well, when you reach certain age, you may or may not be able to make any further contributions. We'll look firstly at the downsizer contribution. To be able to put money in from the proceeds of your home, you do need to be over the age of 55. If you are wanting to do spouse splitting, so splitting your superannuation with your spouse, if you are over the age of 60, there is some restrictions if those funds are accessible. So for example, if you're 60 and retired, splitting funds up into the older spouse, you may not have that eligibility anymore. So basically we think of these funds, are they accessible? Because there may be limitations. And I will talk about splitting your superannuation. Now, also, if you're wanting to claim a tax deduction, when you reach the age of 67, what happens is you need to meet a works test to be able to claim a tax deduction. What this means is you need to work at least 40 hours in a 30-day consecutive period at some stage in the financial year. When you do reach the age of 75, unfortunately, you can no longer put those contributions into your account, but the downsizer, you do still have that eligibility. So downsizer doesn't have any upper age limit, but from 75, we can only receive that super guarantee amount that our employer pays or that downsizer contribution. Let's have a look now at the before tax contributions in a little bit more detail. So remember, these are from your employer, from if you've salary sacrificed those funds, or where you've claimed a tax deduction. Now, there are limits to what you can put into your superannuation. So before taxed contributions have a limit of $30,000. So $30,000, let's say, for example, we've got, say, $14,000 our employer's paying us, then we've got a gap there of $16,000 that we could look to either claim as a tax deduction or go via salary sacrifice. Now, all employees are required to pay a super guarantee amount. Check with your employer, they might even pay above the super guarantee amount. And this is where, if you're looking at growing your superannuation, you can work out what's that percentage and what you might expect to receive in your account from your employer, so you can work out how to grow your super. Now, salary sacrifice and tax deductions, they're generally for when you start hitting those higher tax brackets. So when you earn more than $45,000, this might be a strategy to consider. The reason being is, if you can look at the screen there, is we start hitting that higher tax bracket of 32%. If we choose to salary sacrifice, you can see the tax is only 15%. So that's about 17% tax savings. So who would like to pay more tax than they need to? So if you're looking at growing your super tax effectively, this might be something to think about if you are earning more than $45,000. If you are a lower income earner though, under that $37,000, you might have been looking at that, hold on, why am I paying 15% on my super? Well, if you earn under $37,000, you get what's called the low income super tax offset, which is up to $500, just to make sure that you're not going to be paying more taxes as you would if you were to have got those funds in your hand. So when we look at salary sacrifice and how it works, we're looking to reduce our taxable income. So what happens is we receive our salary and our income tax gets paid, and then we get our take-home pay. So that's what generally happens. But if we choose to salary sacrifice, what happens is we say, I don't want it to go down that channel of being taxed at my marginal tax rate. I want it to be taxed in superannuation instead at 15%. So instead of being taxed marginal rate, we want to be taxed at that lower rate. Remember, that's when you start earning more than that $45,000. So what happens is we'll have a look at a little bit of a case study here. So we're going to have a look at someone, they're on a salary of $60,000. On the left-hand side there, they are not going to salary sacrifice. So they're not putting anything extra into their superannuation. But then we're going to look at another column there where they want to salary sacrifice $10,000 per year. So if we break this down here, we're going to take out $10,000 of that taxable income, meaning that the marginal rate now is only going to be taxed at on the $50,000 as opposed to $60,000. So you can see there, that's where we're going to reduce those taxes. And as you can see on the screen there in red, there is actually going to be more taxes paid if we just choose on that $60,000 because we're paying that higher rate of tax. Now, we do see that that money does reduce if we're putting more money into our superannuation, but overall, if you look at it as the bigger picture, what money are you getting? Because if you're putting money aside into your super, you are saving for your retirement. So if we have a look at this monetary value without salary sacrifice, our take-home pay or income is just over that $50,000. But if we're looking to salary sacrifice, our monetary value is just under $52,000. So that's just a strategy that you might want to consider if you're looking at growing your super tax effectively. Now, in terms of how much you can put in, there was a strategy that they put in place where you can carry forward unused amounts. So Josh, take it away.
Thank you, April. You've had to cover some complex content there, so I'll let you have another little break and catch your breath. And as April said, what we actually realised, or what we were given a few years ago, was the ability for people who had less than $500,000 in their account balance to actually use unused amounts from previous years. So as April had said, each year you get $30,000 that you can contribute up to these pre-tax contributions. Historically, if you didn't use it, you lost it. But the government said for those people who have a balance of less than $500,000, as I said, where they've got those unused amounts, they could basically accumulate those and roll them forward. And that's usable for a 5-year rolling period. So to give you an example, what we've got is, in this case, we've got an employer putting in $12,000. So it means that you've still got capacity there of $18,000. We're then able to either fill that capacity with our salary sacrifice contributions or where we claim a tax deduction. But in years where you don't use that, so let's say that you choose not to put in that full $18,000, you can carry that forward. So how that works is, if we look in this case, we've got that $30,000 limit that you have each year. We're saying that the actual contributions have gone in but not used that full capacity. So these may be those employer contributions of $12,000, for example. That unused amount that you haven't contributed gets carried forward. So in the next year, you have $30,000 plus what you unused last year. And then this may actually go forward another year and another year and another year for up to 5 years. So if you've had capacity build up over a 5-year period and now you're finding yourself with the ability to put more money in, it's important that you check your MyGov account. Now, the reason for this is, although super funds do track this, particularly where you've got multiple super funds, it might be difficult for you to actually work out, well, where is my capacity? So if you jump onto MyGov, that will actually allow you to see what capacity you've accrued and what unused amount you can actually put into your super. So to try and illustrate this a bit further, I've got another case study. And what we've got here is a person who is approaching retirement. They've paid off their mortgage. I wish I was in that position. They've paid off their mortgage and they're actually now in a position that they can go, right, rather than putting that money towards my mortgage, I'm going to redirect it towards my super. They've gone on to MyGov and actually identified that they've currently got $20,000 as an unused carry forward amount. Now, just importantly to point out, this person must have a balance of under $500,000. If their super balance is over $500,000, they cannot use this unused contribution capacity. So what we've got is in the first year, remember they've got $30,000 they can put in each year, but we've identified they've got this additional $20,000 that they can use. So actually their cap is $50,000. They put in those contributions on top of their employer contributions. And that still leaves them a gap. And that gap flows through to the next year. So we again have the $30,000. We have the gap that they've carried forward. So now they've got a contribution capacity of just over $42,000. And as it goes forward. So it's really important, again, as I said, that this is something that you have to be thinking about, and you have to be thinking about using MyGov to actually track those records. But it's a really great way if you find that there's been a major change to your circumstance, such as you've changed your mortgage repayments, you have access to income you previously didn't have. Check your super balance and think about whether it's actually appropriate for you to be rediverting that. Now, April covered a little bit around the different ways that you can do this, including through claiming a tax deduction. So the two main ways you can put in contributions personally through this way is, as April covered off, salary sacrifice, or making a contribution yourself that you put into your super and then you subsequently claim as a tax deduction. There's a very important step in this process though. You need to be making sure that both your super fund is aware you're going to claim it as a tax deduction, as well as the ATO, because both those sets of data or both those records have to match for the ATO to know what you're doing with the money and for the tax to be applied correctly on both your superannuation as well as your income. So if you are going to claim a tax deduction on your superannuation contributions, it is vital that you actually complete a claim form with your super fund, receive confirmation that that is occurring, and then lodge it in your tax return. If you get this step out of order, or if you miss a step, what you're actually going to see is that the ATO will class it as a different type of contribution, and you are not going to get the tax benefits or the outcomes that you want. And we've seen a lot of people caught out by it. So these processes do take thought, they do take planning, and we encourage you to do so. So if you're really wanting to take it next step and think about how you start planning for this, the other thing to consider is how you use the mobile app. And the mobile app is a really great way for you to check what your balance is, to check what transactions are occurring, but it's also a really good way on top of MyGov for you also to be checking where your contribution capacity may be. So as you go through this contribution process, especially with those pre-tax contributions, just take some time first to check what you can and can't do. And as April said earlier, call us and speak to us. You've got a team that is here to back you if you need further guidance or assistance in actually making sure this is set up right for you. But April, that covers off pre-tax contributions. We now really need to think about the other big way you can put contributions into super, which is post-tax.
After-tax. Yes, post-tax, after-tax, or the fancy word non-concessional contributions. But let's use after-tax contributions because ultimately that is what they are. After you've already had your marginal tax rate applied. So these can be contributions from yourself that goes from your bank account into super. So maybe you've sold an investment property, maybe you've received an inheritance, you've won the lottery, congratulations. If you'd like to put that money into your super, it's called a after-tax contribution. There's also spouse contributions as well that you can make to a lower income earner as well. So I will be talking about those spouse contributions. But there is limits. So you had your $30,000 for your before tax contributions. After tax is a little bit more generous. So you can actually put in $120,000 per year, or if you need to put in more than that, you group 3 years together. So then you put in $360,000 in at once. So if you need to put in more than that $120,000, you can bring those 3 years together. And also, if you'd like to receive that the spouse tax offset, that goes into your super as well as the government co-contribution. So I'm going to go through a little bit more details on that government co-contribution now. So let's say, for example, we are a lower income earner. Now, you might not be a lower income earner, but maybe you've got children who've just started work. Maybe they're working at Domino's or McDonald's or something like that, and you want to give them a little bit of a head start with their superannuation. $20 a week will be able to put in up to over $1,000 per year in contributions. And if they're put in after tax and you earn under that $45,000, what you would receive is $500 from the federal government into your super. So how good is it knowing that you get a 50% guaranteed return on your money? Now I can see that there is a little bit of a sliding scale, so your eligibility does drop off up to the salary of $60,400. So it might not be the full $500, but you may have some eligibility there. We've got calculators on our website that you can go and have a look to see what amount you would be eligible for. Now, there's also spouse contributions that you can make. So speaking of lower income earners, if my spouse, say, earned under $37,000 and I'm looking at growing both our retirement nest egg, if I put $3,000 into my spouse's account, I can claim a tax offset of up to $540. So it's just a way of getting a little bit more bang for our buck. And if we're wanting to save that for our retirement, I could also tip that tax offset back into my superannuation as well. Now, in terms of the eligibility, if I was earning under $37,000, I could receive that full tax offset of $540. Otherwise, there is that sliding scale to earning under $40,000 where there may be some eligibility there. Now, there's also one that's called splitting money to your spouse, because one of the common questions that we do get asked is, can I combine my super with my spouse? Unfortunately, you cannot. They are kept separate. But if you'd like to, you can split some of your super between spouses. Now, we do have a Super Insider podcast on spouse strategies. So if you do have a spouse and you want to learn more, and we deep dive really into those strategies, so have a listen. But spouse contribution and splitting up to your spouse, you might do this, maybe you're a younger spouse. If you split up, they can access those funds before you because they're reaching that accessible age of 60. And remember though, if you can remember previously, I did say though, once you're over 60, there is some limitations if you are retired or you can start accessing those funds. So some of this splitting, you do need to do a lot of forward planning. But what it is we can split all those before tax contributions. So the employer salary sacrifice where we've claimed a tax deduction. And we can split up to 85% You're asking yourself, why only 85%? Well, it's because we have to pay that 15% tax to the ATO. So the remaining amount, that 85%, you can put into your spouse's account. So I've talked to you about putting money up, why someone might want to do that because they might want to access their funds earlier. But if they split down to their spouse, maybe they might coming to the age of pension eligibility. So they're trying to reduce their assets within their super. So they shift money down to the younger spouse. So there is certain strategies. Being mindful though that the amounts that you transfer over, it still does count towards your non-concessional or after-tax amount. So that doesn't change, it still counts towards the contributing spouse's amount. There's also the downsizer contribution. So this is where we sell our home and the proceeds of our sale goes towards our superannuation. Now what we can do is we could look at putting up to $300,000 in our super. Now that's per person. So if you're in a couple, say myself, I could put in $300,000 and my spouse could also put in $300,000. This is eligible over the age of 55 and there is no upper age limit. So you can be 90 years of age and still put this money into superannuation. So that is the downsizer contribution. Are you making the most of these contributions? We have contribution calculators on our website for you to play around with. When I started 13 years ago, the first place I went to was our calculators because I needed to work out how much I needed. And this also was well with using the contribution calculator. So if we have a look at the salary sacrifice and compounding returns, we're just going to have a little bit of a case study here. So let's say we've got Susan here. She's got $78,000 per year. She wants to put in $100 per fortnight of salary sacrifice. This is going to reduce her take-home pay by only $68 because she's paying that less tax there. She intends to retire at 65, but what's the difference if she starts doing this at the age of 30, 40 or 50? Because one of your superpowers in superannuation is time. So let's have a look at if she starts increasing this money at the age of 30. She can receive an extra $266 per fortnight. She starts at 40, it's $160 extra per fortnight. The age of 50, it's $86 per fortnight. So you can really see there the advantages of being engaged with your super as early as you possibly can. Now we've talked about contributions, but the other way, as Josh mentioned before, is investments. So take it away. I know you love investments.
And this will give you a good break in discussion because I will talk about this for a while. But before we talk about investments, just a question that has come in, and I do encourage you all, remember we've got some of our team online answering questions. Make sure you are putting any questions in and they will respond to them. And if we have time at the end, we'll also cover off some of those in Q&A. But one of the questions that came up that just caught my attention, it was maybe us talking about downsizer, and also we had a case study there of paying off a mortgage. The questions come through saying, is it better that I actually contribute to super, or should I put more into my mortgage? The important thing there is that, again, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer generally. It's going to be very much based on you and your circumstances. There could very much be pros and cons. And I say this because it is a question that we get asked a lot. In my own circumstances, what I actually do is think about doing a bit of both. Okay, so where I'm able, where I have the income capacity, does it allow me to put in a bit extra into my super or into my spouse's super? Or does it also at the same time allow me to put in a little bit extra onto my mortgage? When times get a bit tougher, I will actually look to reduce one or both of those. So really in my own case, I tend to do it more when I'm able, and that's perhaps the way that you think about it. It shouldn't be one or the other, but actually thinking around where there's capability for you. The other thing I'd just like to pick up on really quickly is April was talking about spouse splitting and talked about some of the reasons for doing that. The other reason to consider with that, and this is again something I've done in my own circumstance with my spouse, is what we found was my superannuation was growing larger and much faster than hers because my spouse actually spent time out of the workforce when we had our son. Now, that allows me to think about a couple of things. Although our super is something we look at together for our combined retirement, it means that if in the future legislation changes, if all the money's in my account, it means it's susceptible to that. So by actually splitting some of it into her account and trying to equalise our balances, it just minimises any risk for legislation change that could occur 5, 10, 20, even 30 years down the track that I can't envisage. If that legislation's based on a balance figure, then it means that I could be very adversely impacted. So that's the other reason to think about equalising balances. It just makes sure that you're limiting any future legislation risk. But as April said, it is important that we not just think about contributions to super, but we then think about, well, how do we grow it? And I mentioned earlier that if you actually looked at your account balance, where you've got an accumulation account, if you looked at your account balance and added up all the transactions, it is probably likely that the bulk of your balance has been created through investment earnings, not through contributions. Investment earnings is actually the most powerful. I love that phrase April used, superpower. I'm going to use that now. Investment earnings is the most powerful superpower that you have. There are three things that you need to consider though when it comes to investments, and this is something we're going to cover off in more detail over the next 10 minutes or so. The first is the way you look at your investments in super is going to be very much driven by your time frame. Now, the beautiful thing about super is that it is the longest term investment you are likely to ever have. You think about someone entering the workforce now, they'll get their super at that contribution rate of nearly 12%. They'll get that from about the age of 16 or so, and they'll have that right through until their mid-60s, potentially even their 70s. That is an incredibly long investment horizon. So superannuation comes with advantage over the long term. But you might be thinking, well, I'm a couple of years out from retirement. Should I start thinking about that time frame differently? Yeah, you probably should. Or you might be thinking, I'm coming a couple of years out from life expectancy. Do I change the way I look at it? Yeah, you probably should. So we'll talk a little bit about time frame considerations. The second thing we'll talk about is risk tolerance. And I've already mentioned this, that very often people will invest aggressively, but then they won't sleep a wink because they're so worried about it. They're so worried about the volatility that we've seen intrinsically in our markets, particularly since COVID and earlier in 2025 with some major changes in geopolitics. So it's important that you think about not just investing for growth, but investing in a way that makes you comfortable. Our chief economist, Brian Parker, often says it's the sleep at night test that you need to think about. If you're losing sleep around the way that your super is invested, probably means it isn't invested correctly. And that's something, again, we'll come back to. And the last is level of returns, but let me actually change this a little bit and say, what is your expectation for returns? And should that be considered or is it realistic? Again, a lot of people will actually say they want very high, strong returns, and I understand that. And yes, it's what we all want. But the higher the returns you want to achieve, generally, the higher the risk you need to take in order to get them. Now, there is no quick wins. There is really no way of making a lot of money in a very short period without taking significant risks into the unknown. But what we know with super is that over the long term, through sound, responsible investing, you can actually achieve both strong returns as well as ride out periods of volatility. And that's some of what I'm wanting to discuss with you. So let's first look at the major asset types that you may have within your super and that Australian Retirement Trust invests in. We have a lot of people who have traditionally put their money in things like cash and fixed interest bonds. And these have been markets that historically actually performed okay, but certainly since COVID, they haven't performed terribly strongly. Certainly not until recent years. Although cash and fixed interests or bonds give you stability, although they give you security, they don't often give you the returns that you need and want, especially when compared to the rising cost of inflation, the rising cost of living. Our members, to be frank, you demand stronger returns from us, and we won't find those in those more conservative assets. We then have to look more broadly at things like property, infrastructure, alternative investments, as well as shares. Now, just to explain each one of those very briefly, and then we'll offer a couple of examples. With property, these are large residential, commercial and industrial properties, thousands of them, that we invest in here in Australia as well as internationally. It gives us access to the property value, the capital value, but it also gives us access to income. A lot of people are very keen on investing their super in property. And so we do get asked the question a lot about how can I buy a property with my super? Something to consider there. If you were to do that yourself through a self-managed super fund account, for example, you would be putting a lot of your money, if not the majority of it, into one property investment. And if in the future you needed to start accessing a portion of that, you couldn't offload the front room or a bedroom or sell half the house. The advantage of being with a large fund like Australian Retirement Trust is that we invest in thousands of properties on your behalf. It gives you diversity. It also gives you access, and it gives us the access to change things as we need to. Infrastructure is roads, rails, airports, traditional assets, but it's also things like emerging energy production, renewable energy production, data warehousing. These emerging technologies that again give us great access to capital or capital value, but also generate an income. There are toll roads that you drive on that would actually come back to you as profit. Airports that you would use that you're getting a profit back into your super from using. Alternatives I'll come back to in a moment because it's easier if I explain shares first. So what we've got is shares, which is where we buy staking companies on the share market. Okay, we should all be very used to and aware of what they are. Shares do offer long-term strong returns, but we also know they come with the greatest risk of volatility. Where we see this beautiful area for alternatives is that they are very similar to shares in that we are investing into large organisations, private capital opportunities that aren't listed on the share market. So these are privately owned companies that we're investing in, and the advantage or the difference of them when compared to shares is share markets really are driven by sentiment. Minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, they fluctuate grossly and grandly. When it comes to alternative or private equity investments, you tend to see that they don't have such strong buffets in movements that you get through shareholder sentiment. So if I actually give you a couple of examples, as a member of Australian Retirement Trust, you are a part owner effectively of London Heathrow Airport. You also have access to, or we are an investor in the G'day Group, the largest caravan park and luxury destination group in Australia. This is one of our strongest performing private capital investments. You also have property investments through your super, including the South Everleigh precinct in the south of Sydney. And the building we're showing you here is the headquarters of the Commonwealth Bank for Australia. So giving you an idea that we're not just investing in large property on your behalf, but these are properties where we have signature tenants in providing income for you. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we also invest in new and emerging technologies, including renewable energy production. And here we're showing the Puget wind farm. These are just a taste of the broad diversity of investments that you actually have in your portfolio as a member. We encourage you to find out more, as I said, and also, though, to think about where your comfort level is. How would you respond if markets turn downwards? Is that something that's really going to worry you, or is it something that you'll accept? By doing the investor profile quiz, what our system will do is just give you some guidance, perhaps for you to start thinking on or to start a conversation on about the type of investor you are. Are you someone that is quite aggressive and probably more interested in growth or higher growth investment options? Or are you someone who's quite conservative or needs to be quite defensive, who is really worried about the impact of market volatility? Now, these different profiles, in some cases reflect your own appetite for volatility, but they also reflect where your time frame is. The other thing that's important in this, though, is that sometimes that profile might tell you this is where you are, but that doesn't necessarily marry up with the performance you want to achieve. So if it told you you were a moderate investor, but you wanted to get high returns, then there's some thinking you have to do there about your comfort and the trade-off that you're willing to or not willing to make. Remember, at the end of the day, you need to be able to sleep soundly. So to try and help you sleep soundly, we can manage your investments for you. And in fact, 90% of our members have not made an investment choice. They are in our default option. And in these options, we actually look after their investments and change those investments over time as they approach and enter into retirement. And this is called our My Super investment strategy. If you don't make a choice, or if you choose that you're just happy to stay in the default, then what we will do is invest automatically on your behalf, and we'll adjust that, as I said, as you age. And so you'll actually see us de-risk your investment as you approach and get closer to retirement. We still give you access to important growth assets like shares and property, for example, but we start to taper those later in life when we know you can't as easily respond or react to a major market movement. We want to protect you more. But we want to take advantage that, as I said, super being such a long-term investment, in those younger years, you are really getting the opportunity to have the strongest possible returns, and knowing that if the market falls when you're 20 or 30 or 40 or even 50 for that matter, that you still have time to recover. If, though, you do want to choose your investment options, you can do so. And at Australian Retirement Trust, it's very simple to do that. Online, through the mobile app, or over the phone. We have 16 other investment options that we provide to you, including diversified options, which actually combine a lot of those different assets I've talked about, and are actually your ready-made options that you can choose from. Things like our high growth option, our balanced conservative option, and different names like that you would see. We also, though, have what are called asset class options. And this is where you might say you want to just invest in property, or you just want to invest in cash, or you just want to invest in a specific area. The other thing is, though, you can mix and match all of these 16 to build the profile that you want. So it's really up to you. You can choose to really hold back from investments and let us look after that for you, which, as I said, 90% of our members have done. Or you might be that 1 in 10 who really wants to lean in and take control of the investments and the way your money is looked after. To do either of those and to give you comfort, we again encourage you to jump on our website and to think a bit more about our investments. There on our website, you'll see the diversified options that I've listed here and how aggressive they are. How much money or tilt do they have towards growth assets? And this is actually really important when it comes to the expectations that you start to build for yourself. And what I'm showing here is the returns over a 20-year period for our balanced option, year on year on year. Now, over that period, our balanced option returned on average over 8% returns after fees and taxes. But you can see that journey was not consistent. It did come with negative years. It did come with low years. It also came with wonderful years that were peaks. You need to understand this journey that your super will go on. And although we can try and plan for this or minimise some of the volatility to some extent, we could have never foreseen things like the global financial crisis or COVID or other events in geopolitics that maybe shift markets dramatically, quickly. I would also encourage you, though, to look at the performance that you're currently receiving and to think about whether that's what you need. Our high growth option, for example, is one of the strongest performing options in the market, certainly at the end of September 2024. And this might be something that you're very happy with, but in researching it further, you realise you're just not comfortable with the volatility that provides that return. So again, explore the investment options available to you and think about whether A, you're happy with the performance, B, happy with the way it's invested, but C, you can also sleep soundly at night. Now I'll start to wrap up and then I will hand back to April, but just to try and bring this together. And for those of you who attended our first webinar, you would have seen me actually show this slide. What I'm showing here is $10,000 that over time has simply tracked the consumer price index. So in other words, it's actually tracking how we've seen the cost of living increase over time. So $10,000 20 years ago would now be more closely around $17,000 in terms of its value. Now, it's very important that the way we invest your money stays ahead of inflation. And as I said, we have to think about assets, particularly outside of those traditional areas like cash and fixed interest bonds to achieve this. They can help to manage the volatility, but we really need to look at other areas in growth assets to achieve strong outcomes for you. I'm showing here that same $10,000 if it was invested 20 years ago in the high growth option. You'll see a drop in about 2009, which was the global financial crisis. Didn't we think, for those of us that were around, it was the end of the world? I think I may remember it far better than April, perhaps. We then have more recently, though, if I look around 2022, the financial crisis as a result of COVID. And we really did think we were in the depths of a financial cliff. But look at the recovery that has come after it. I'll also show if you're invested in our balanced option over those 20 years, or the balanced risk adjusted option, or the conservative balanced option. As you can see, in all cases, although they are subject to volatility, that volatility is different based on the degree of exposure to growth assets. But you can also see that the degree of exposure to those growth assets has driven the outcome. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment you all go for the high growth option. In fact, I've talked a lot about how you balance that with that sleep at night test. Make sure you invest in a way that you're comfortable with, but is also achieving the outcome you want. And if those two things don't match up, then maybe it's a really great opportunity to have a discussion with us to think about how we get the settings right for you. Now, just in wrapping up this section before I do pass back to April, I'm showing here, those were the diversified options or the multi-sector options. I've got here our asset class options. And you can see here, without those different assets being part of the exposure, without a bit of cash and a bit of bonds and a bit of property, these are assets these are investment options exposed to one particular asset. So you can see the Australian share option there is completely exposed to growth markets and the volatility that comes with it. Cash is on the other extreme. So again, this needs to be a consideration that you take. So what's the end game? Well, the end game here is that we've got a 30-year-old and we're saying that they earn $78,000. They're receiving employer contributions, but they make no additional contributions of their own. They have a super balance of $50,000 and they intend to retire at the age of 65. If they sat back and looked at their investment journey, what will be the different results if they were achieving 5% returns after fees and taxes, 6%, or 7% over that period? If they were receiving 5% returns after fees and taxes, they'll retire on just short of $400,000 in today's money. If it was 6%, it'd be closer to $500,000, or if it was 7%, closer to $600,000. It shows the importance of choice, but it also shows the importance of being with a strong performing superannuation fund. Now, as I said earlier, there is a very big focus here about generating wealth to make sure you've got a strong income or a high as possible income in retirement. But there's also the really important consideration of how do I protect my wealth should I not take it to retirement, make it to retirement. And on that note, I will pass back to April to cover this off, and then I'll come back to close things off for the webinar and move us into Q&A. Thanks, April.
Thanks, Josh. I'll give you a break now. I will be talking to you about insurances and making sure yourself and your loved ones are covered. But just before I do go on that, one of our most common questions about the investment options is, can I have more than one investment option? Yes, you can. So you can invest in a multiple amount of these investment options. So insuring yourselves and your loved ones. You may not consider yourself being your biggest asset. We always think about insurances as we need to get our car insured, we need to get our house insured, but nobody really thinks about insuring themselves and hoping that we are invisible. But unfortunately, there is at times where we've had to stop work due to illness or injury, and it might alarm you to see the green stats here. This is the age in which people have had to stop work involuntary due to their own health. So as I said, we really don't want this to happen to ourselves, and we hope it never does, but there are those cases, and you can see there, particularly under the age of 59, a lot of people are retiring due to their ill health. So when we talk about insurances, we need to know how much we need and what we need to consider to protect. So you need to look at what are your debts and your liabilities and dependents. So for example, myself, I have a spouse, I have 2 children. If something happened to me, I need to make sure my mortgage is covered, because that's really a headache for a lot of people at the moment. I've got 2 children that goes to school, 8 and 9 years of age. So they've got many years that they'll be going to school that we need to afford for. So that's something to consider, the debts and your dependents. Also consider though, do you have any other assets outside of your superannuation and your insurance balance? So maybe you've got assets or shares or investment property which you can dig into if something does happen to yourself. So consider what other assets or savings you have. Consider the costs of the cover. So some people tend to, when they get older, they've paid off the mortgage, kids have moved out of the house. So do they need as much insurance? Maybe not. But this is where we can't take into account your personal circumstance, but we can definitely guide you as to understand how much you need. And if you are over the age of 60, remember that's the age in which you can start accessing your superannuation tax-free. So that's another consideration. Do you need insurance after the age of 60 if you're able to access your superannuation? Now let's have a look here at the types of insurance that you would receive within superannuation. So there's 3 types of cover we've got here. You've got death cover, you've got total and permanent disablement, and you've also got income protection. Now, income protection pays you when you're temporarily unable to work due to illness or injury. Now, you would probably receive a standard amount or a default amount of insurance. Generally, that covers the death and the total and permanent disablement. You may have a default level of income protection, which again pays you when you're temporarily unable to work due to illness or injury, but it's not always the case. So I would highly recommend you going to your statement or through online to see how much insurances you have. Now, when we do think of death cover, we're really trying to look after our loved ones if something does happen to us. So what goes part and parcel with that is our super gets paid out as well as our death cover. But another thing to consider is, have you let your super fund know who you want to receive those funds? A lot of people don't actually let the super fund know, and what happens is you're leaving that decision up to the super fund. By legislation, we have to pay to a dependent. If we can't find a dependent, the second step is to go to the will or the estate. And that's where people do just assume, well, I've got a will in place, that's fine. Well, you really do need to put on what's called a binding death benefit nomination. So if you wanted to go to a will, you can leave it to a legal personal representative. There may be the option to put a preferred beneficiary on there as well. However, it's non-binding. So let's have a look at who you can nominate as a binding death benefit nomination. Generally, you can think of it as your dependents. So a spouse would be a dependent, any child, a person that's in an interdependent relationship, or someone who's a financial dependent of yourself. Now, if we dig deeper into an actual story, there was a 25-year-old who passed away, and his flatmate claimed as an interdependent relationship. Now, that person received all of the death insurance and all their superannuation, when I could, hand on heart, probably think that that boy wanted that money to go to his family or his parents or his siblings. So this is where it is really, really important to make sure you've got the right person on your superannuation so that it goes to the right people. Now, if you don't have anybody that fits within those categories, so maybe you want to send it to a charity, or it might be your niece or nephew who's not financially dependent, maybe your grandchildren. What you can do is you put this all in your will and you nominate in your estate who is to receive those funds. You just let the super fund know that you want to leave it to a legal personal representative, and it just goes straight to your estate and they handle it from there. So really important to consider if we're looking at our insurance, also look at that binding death benefit nomination, and they last on the account for 3 years, which you can easily renew. Looking at your insurance, go through your member online, have a look at your annual benefit statements. You can use the mobile app and see your insurance. You can also go on there and change your insurances as well. So if you think you need to increase or decrease your cover, or maybe you don't need insurance at all, you can go through your member online and change that. So if you need to know more, heaps of information on our website about those insurances. Now, we'll get off the heavy topic of insurances and I'll hand it back to Josh to go through our next steps.
Thank you, April. And I think it is important. Insurance can be a difficult area of conversations and thought. It's not something we really want to put our minds to, but in thinking about planning for retirement, just make sure that you do as April said, at least have those boxes ticked. Tell us, if nothing else, how you want your super to be looked after in the event that something happens to you. If I can be frank, you're off floating with Buddha or Allah or God herself. We don't know what you wanted done with your money. So just make sure that you've got those instructions in place, and it gives us that direction to make sure that your loved ones aren't scrambling or having it go to someone unintended, like in that example April spoke to. So we talk a lot within our webinars and within the advertisements we make and everything else about awakening your super. And there are some very simple steps that you can take, noting that you've already taken a really big step just by being part of this webinar and engaging more with your super and your retirement planning. Do jump into the contributions calculator. April talked about when she first started with us 13 years ago, this was something she did straight away. And it's something that I've used a lot in front of clients to show them how to really make a difference regarding their super. Gives them an idea of what's the best option they can take now, but also what the impact is going to be to their final balance, potentially, as well as the tax savings that could often give them. The other thing to think about is to do that risk profile quiz. So know how you're going to put additional monies into your super, but also know how they're going to be invested. If you're working hard to put additional money into your super, you want to make sure your super's working hard for you as well. Okay, they both work in tandem. Remember, as I said, that investor profile might be something different to what you want to achieve. And that's where you have to then decide, well, do I want to take on more risk than perhaps I'm comfortable with, or do I need to pare back my expectations? Again, know in either one of these cases that once you've done the calculator or the quiz, if you're left wondering or unsure, reach out to us to discuss it further. Importantly, review your insurance needs. Now, April touched on the fact that as you get older, the cost for your insurance gets far, far more expensive. In some cases, it really may cause you to think about whether you turn it off. So review what your insurance needs are, review whether you need it, and if you do, how much you need, to make sure it's set up properly and that you can justify the cost for it. But also it's important to make sure, and I'd say this is probably one of the most important things, to make sure that you've got your wishes in place. That if something happens to you, even if you don't have insurance, if this is just in regard to your super balance, make sure we know what to do with that money in the event of your passing. Okay? I'm sure anyone, April, myself, any one of our team could tell you bad stories we've heard from clients regarding the payment of benefits for their loved ones. And it's something we really, really encourage you to get ahead of. The other thing, though, is to know that there's a lot of self-help that you can continue to take on. We do have our advice team that is able to support you. We have a fantastic contact centre that can help you if you trip or stumble or want to find your way through something. And we also, though, on our website, as we've mentioned throughout this webinar, have some great tools and calculators, as well as some really wonderful webinars and podcasts as well. April mentioned one of the podcasts. I think that's because she actually appears in it, so maybe a bit of shameless self-promotion. But those podcasts are really wonderful ways while you're doing the washing, while you're walking the dog, while you're having a jog, in my case, to think about different parts of your super or listen to those things for different insights. So we are going to come to Q&A, but before we do that, I actually want to just jump forward a bit. There are a couple of other things for you to think about. What happens if you do those calculators, if you do go through those processes and you're still left wondering, what if this webinar has actually generated more questions for you then answers. Well, that's great. Give us a call. Give one of our team a call and let them assist you. We have a wonderful team, noting that some of what we've covered off in this session, we may actually have to refer you to an external advisor to go into more detail on that with you. But as much as possible, it's certainly something we will assist you in the first instance. The other thing to actually note is that you will receive, following on from this webinar, an email from us including a feedback request. We value your feedback more than anything. I think I speak on behalf of the entire education team. There are about 15 of us that go all around the country speaking to our wonderful members. And when we're out in the grounds, it's great because we get that immediate feedback and conversation. You have that opportunity too. You'll receive that email from us with feedback request. Please tell us your thoughts. Tell us what you need, what you want, what you liked and what you didn't. Maybe you loved April's anecdotes but didn't like mine. That's fine. Let us know. We really want to make sure that what we're doing for you is what you need and want. So let's jump into Q&A, and maybe to get the ball rolling, one that I wanted to actually go to, if I can find it. I did see it come in while you were covering insurance. Bear with me.
Would you like me to do one before? You got it?
Yes, sorry. Thank you. The question that came in is, can I change individualised investment percentages? And can I remove all share investments from my investments? The answer to both is yes. So as April said, you can actually choose across all of our investments, and you have the ability to actually set what percentage you want in each of those, including if you wanted 0 in shares, you absolutely have that control. So again, you can do that through the mobile app, you can do it online, or you can do that over the phone by calling us. But I know there's probably been twice in the last 15 years I've changed my investments here at ART. I've done both of those on the mobile app, and both occasions took me less than about 45 seconds, I'd suggest. So very, very easy to do, and you can control that.
Yes, it is very simple to switch your investments online. Another question here. We didn't really go through it with this session, but somebody said, I've heard that I can grow my super using a transition to retirement. How does that work? And this is a great question. Transition to retirement, if you remember earlier on in the piece, this is an account where you can access tax-free funds from the age of 60, so between 60 to 65, and if you're still working. Now, because you can access that money tax-free, what you're doing is you could substitute your income through your super. So take out super tax-free and recontribute by using that salary sacrifice or tax deduction, so you can tax effectively grow your super. Now, this might sound like a headache, and we have these talks that go for a whole hour on boosting your super using a transition to retirement. Give us a call and ask us about what is a transition to retirement strategy. Alternatively, we do have pay in retirement, which is our next session, and we do dive in a little bit more about the transition to retirement. Yeah,
I was actually going to say our next webinar that is Pay Yourself in Retirement is a really great way to start getting some insight into that TTR strategy that April talked about. I've got 2 questions here. Can I transfer shares in my own name into my ART account? No, it's what's known as an in-species contribution, and we don't allow for that. So unfortunately, if you've got a share portfolio outside of your super, you can't just bring those shares in to your ART account. You either have to retain them as they are outside of super, or if you're still able to contribute, remembering those limits that April talked to, as well as some of those age considerations in some cases. But if you sell those down, understandably, there's tax issues and other issues associated with that. But if you sell those down, you can then move that money into superannuation, but the shares themselves you can't. And the other quick question, April, I'll answer just because I did see it pop up, is that one of our corporate members has written in, so someone who works for one of our key employer accounts, and said, if I leave employment with them, can I still contribute from a different employer? Yes. So if you're a member of one of our corporate accounts and you leave their employment, you'll actually just become a member of our public offer fund, so our general fund, and you can let your new employer know that you want their contributions to go into that. So yes, you can continue to have contributions come in.
Another question here is, can I withdraw a lump sum to pay off my mortgage after I turn 60 if I'm still working? Now remember, when you turn 60, it is an accessible age, but depending on your situation, your working arrangements will depend on how much you can access. So over the age of 60, up to age 65, if you're still working, maximum you can access is 10%. We don't need to know why you're accessing those funds, but you can opt to ask for an annual payment, which can be paid out to yourself as well. Otherwise, if you cease work, retire after 60 or turn 65, you can access all of your super.
Thank you, April. Question I've had come in is there a risk in investing in international shares? Apologies. Is the risk in investing in international shares too high at the age of 77? As I outlined, there certainly will be volatility that comes with shares. And certainly as you're approaching that age, you have to seriously think about if there's a significant market downturn, as we've certainly experienced in the early stages of 2025, if there's a significant market downturn, will I have time to make that money back? At the age of 77, you're probably having to seriously think about whether you could still have time for that recovery. And so if you haven't done so already, perhaps you do want to think just around the investment profile. I would suggest you give us a call and just make sure that the mix is right for you, that it's still giving you what you want in terms of growth, if that's the case, but that it's also making sure that should you only have a few more years ahead of you, I know that's a bit blunt to maybe say, but you do not want your super balance to have not recovered by that stage, certainly if you're wanting to leave it to pass on to loved ones.
I just want to say, can I thank all our education team in the background? There's been heaps of questions that have come through and they've done a stellar job at responding to those questions. So thank you. I might do one final question, then I'll get you to wrap it up because we're coming to time. One of them is, how much super will I need? Now, if you haven't gone to the plan for your retirement, you might want to go to that because we
that first webinar.
Yep, first webinar in this series. So go to that one because we really dive into how to put budgets and, you know, how much you might need. We go through guidance, what's comfortable, modest lifestyle. Alternatively, though, I would start, as I said, I started with the calculators, the forecaster calculators, to find out how much you will need when you get to retirement based on your lifestyle, because it really does depend on what you want to do in retirement. So, Josh, would you like to wrap it up?
Yes, and we are getting close to time, but there is one question. We've obviously got one Gen Zer in the audience who has asked us that question we always get. Do you want to guess what it is regarding investments?
No.
Okay. I won't put that test you. It is the old Bitcoin question.
Oh, yes,
do you invest in crypto or Bitcoin? Short answer is no, we don't. There are very strong views. If you asked our chief economist about that, he'd probably give you a very straight answer. We see them as being a very volatile investment. We also don't think that they are a terribly secure investment, in that there's no real legislation or governing body that oversees them. Although there are elements of how they invest in terms of the technology and other areas that we do find appealing and that we may sometime in the future think about investing in if there is opportunity in different ways to do so. Bitcoin itself is not something we would invest in. Our chief economist tends to say that if that's where you're interested, then he'll just take your money and put it on the horses because it's about the same risk or results.
Can I also do another shameless plug for our podcast?
You absolutely can.
Super Insider Podcast, actually, Brian Parker, who's Josh is talking about, our chief economist. If you're wanting to know all things, what's going on in our economy, he does talk very often on our podcast about what is happening in the world, and he's actually a very engaging economist.
Very entertaining.
Engaging. So listen out, Super Insider, give it a search.
Absolutely. And occasionally we appear on Super Insider. So again, you're being self-serving. On that note, we again would like to thank you for your time. As I acknowledged up front, you have made an investment in your own financial future and your retirement. And we really, really do thank you for that and encourage you to continue on that journey. And we do hope that this session has been a very valuable one for you. As I said at one point, if it has raised more questions for you, that's probably a good thing. Explore a bit further, go a bit deeper, and if you need assistance and guidance, please reach out to us. But in the meantime, we hope to see you in the near future. Take care of yourselves, and thank you very much for riding alongside me, April.
Thank you.